This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Ben Watt Chestnut and the occasional pop-in Sebastian Romero. On this week's Weigh-In, we're going to talk about the success of Jadeen Cox at the coaching level. How Jadeen Cox has had such a successful run at his coaching stint, and also we're going to talk Bassett takes visit to Nebraska, so we're gonna do some of that, some Bassett talk today, and that is this week's Takedown Thursdays. So if we really jump right into this Jadeen Cox, since we announced that first, so Jadeen Cox got hired last July for the USA Wrestling U17 and U20 teams and has gone 4 for 4, winning both world team titles. So it tells you that, Jadeen Cox is he's in his era that now he's in his coaching era. He's in his era where now he feels he can help the young athletes coming up, and he's doing well at it. I think that's a really good thing to have Jadeen Cox in that room. I think that's something that is more than likely the most tantalizing thing, is that you have a high level athlete like Jadeen Cox that is like Jadeen Cox, it's coming around and being able to teach very well and do it at an overzealous level that is very good. Jadeen Cox was, when he was in college, he was good. If you don't know a good Jadeen Cox match, you really don't know what's really getting at and what's going on there, because Jadeen Cox, when he was in college, or even when he was competing for the world and an Olympic team, he had some very good matches. Some very good matches that came down to the wire. Some things that were very well for him that he was able to do in his time, and I think that's a really great thing for Cox here, is that he's been able to now take all that and teach it and do very well at the U17, U20 level, and that's really great. That's a good thing in terms of wrestling. That's really good in terms of wrestling, and how Jadeen Cox has been able to do that type of thing. And I feel like that's really good, because the way he's been able to do that and the way he's been able to do what he does is really good. So I feel like having Cox at that level, he's going to teach a lot. And I feel like it's not like he's with one school or team where it's more or less he's like, okay, he's with this university, that university. He's kind of with USA Wrestling. So it's like it's growing USA Wrestling, and it's growing to the point where, okay, you're going 4 for 4. You can only think, like most coaches would say to you, is if you're beating them now, and this is true, if you're beating them now at the U20 and the U17 world level, who's to say when you get to the senior level, you're not going to be able to start having the same dominance, going 4 for 4 at a world championships, at the first 4 world championships of those guys moving up. I really think that's an interesting notation to that, and I think that's a really good thing that very well is going to go on. And I think that there are great things and there are bad things, and I think some of them are really good things, and a lot of them have been really great things, and a lot of them have been things that have gone better, for great reasons. And that's one of them, being able to see the success at the U17 and the U20 world level is really good. So that's something to really look forward to, that the Jadeen Cox touches has done something, because we're starting to see a lot of that now. Some of these guys guys and gals that we grew up on, watching wrestle, are now starting to kind of take their coaching roles, or kind of they're stepping off the mat in a wrestling capacity, and and stepping back on in a coaching capacity. Just really a really good thing to see that, we're starting to see that some of these guys aren't just, off to do something else. They're actually trying to continue, providing knowledge to the youth. And I feel like that's a really good thing for the sport of wrestling. Whenever you can keep some of your greatest athletes in the sport, and I say that because you got a lot of them that take on this MMA. And there's nothing wrong with taking on MMA, but you lose that mentored figure, because if you're in MMA, you're focusing on MMA. You're doing that kind of thing. If you're still in wrestling and you're coaching, you're primarily focused on coaching. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, I think it's a good thing that's going on, a good level thing. You know, I think that's a very well thing that is going on, and that's amazing for Jaden Cox and USA Wrestling. That's a nice thing to connotate, and that's a nice thing to kind of almost, feel. Is that it's really great to see that success, because it's only going to build, and I think that success even more is going to bring itself back to the college level. And I say that because at the college level, we're going to get really good wrestlers coming out of high school, like a Bo Bassett, or like, many others. They're going to be coming out and really wrestling college. And now we're starting to, we're getting good college wrestling here, you know. And I think that, it's getting really well for the reasons being the high level of competition has improved. And I'm not saying that it wasn't as good as it was before, but you got a lot of guys that when they're getting to when they're getting to NCAAs, it's like they're going at it with the mentality, I want to be an All-American, which I'm pretty sure all guys have had before, but it's a lot of kitchen sink. It's a lot of like, hey, this guy's the 2 seed, 1 seed. Let me throw everything at him. Let me see what I can do. We learned that from Richie Figueroa and Dean Peterson. That we're able to learn that a lot of these guys that, for I like to say, don't get into that top 5 or high 5 ranking. When they get to NCAAs, they're real scrappy, and there's some guys that are real scrappy and don't even All-American. I think right now it's at a really good place in terms of wrestling. It's really good right now, and I like it for where it's at for many of those reasons. That it. I would like to say, and this is a Google it type situation. There are quite a few matches where you see there's text, there's pinfalls, but a lot of it is surprises. Like when you look at some of those early rounds, and I don't mean you're like your 1 seeds and your high seeds. I mean like some of those like lower level seeds. You start to understand there's some good matches out of there. Some good matches that come out of there, because your 1s and 2s may get a lot of falls, and even then, don't get me wrong, that's still really good in terms of wrestling, is to see those falls and whatnot. That's a really good thing. And with that being a really good thing, that's like overzealous, pretty great. I think some of the great things that we're able to do is that overzealous, is that like seeing that overzealous performance of a guy who may not have picked an All-American, may not have been ranked to be an All-American, goes down to NCAAs and finds an All-American status and places. Those are the guys those are really good. There's some really good performances at that NCAA level that we've seen lately, that we've seen really good. You haven't necessarily seen it as like it's been before. You got one guy that is just kind of, well, I know many of you will say, well, you just had Carter Starachi get 5 titles. Yeah, but we won't touch that Starachi subject at all. That's a separate issue in itself. And we won't be touching none of that. But yeah, I get it. There are guys that have been able to have very well dominance, but you're seeing a lot of good wrestling. Like, I think, in terms of when I was watching last year's NCAA's, year more or less last year's, you don't see a lot of poor wrestling going on down there. And what I mean is, I'm sure there over the years you can find some matches where you see just some guys that just really they don't look like they're getting after it. Um, and I'm not saying that's every guy, but you see some of those where it's just like, and it's gonna happen only in the first round. First round is where you see it. You don't see that in second. You don't not as much. You don't. It's kind of where you see some guys where they're just slowly getting there. That's how I say. When, that's how I say Malik Hanselman, uh, or Hanselman, or whatever his name may be, ended up getting turned twice by Robert Howard. If any of you remember that, like you got turned twice. I don't say it's poor wrestling, but you, you got turned where there were some back points counting, and it was definitely an interesting connotation. Um, an interesting connotation, and I think that's a good thing in terms of in terms of uh, in terms of wrestling. That was a good thing. Yeah, Malik Hanselman. That's what it is, Malik Hanselman. Yeah, and for me, it's just you'll see it. And you know what? I don't say that was lazy. I don't say that was poor wrestling. It was lazy wrestling. And a lot will I'll break you down lazy wrestling. Lazy wrestling is not moving, not really fully clearing positions. That's the if you're getting up, you're kind of getting up, not to a way you're in a defensive position where you're able to get away freely. You're kind of leaving yourself a little exposed. And I kind of say that's what happens in a lot of these surprise pinfalls that we have. You're exposed to yourself. You're not fully clearing positions. It's just one of those things that you got to be very careful about. And I say that, that made the difference. And that year, the talk of that year was all about how dangerous it is when you get back points in that, when you get you know, good back points. When you get two quick turns in a first period, how dangerous that can be because they're going into a second period, or third period, whatever the case may be. If you get them in second period, you're going into third. If you get them in first, going into second. Um, they're going into that with the connotation that they're down. Some guys, are unable to recover from that. They're unable to mount a comeback. Others do, but you know, sometimes they don't. And you look at that and you say you can't let yourself go down and get turned twice because you look at how many matches when you see somebody get turned twice in a first period, how the it changes the outcome. It changes the storyline of the match significantly, drastically, because there's so much that you're able to go on with that you're down. You're down, however the case may be. Now we got 3-point takedowns. At the time when that went on, it was 2-point takedowns. So, we have 3-point takedowns now, and then you get two sets of four swipes. You're up big. You're up really big. You're up in a manifest where now you're closer to a tech than you would have been in the later years, in past years. Now it's a time where like you get that 3-point takedown and you get two sets of four swipes, you're up big. You're up big. And that's just the way I look at it because you put yourself in a good position when you're up 11-0. That's a really good thing for wrestling. And that's what, that's like we've talked in the previous weeks. High offense, high defense, but we've talked a lot of that. So that's just my partake on that. But nonetheless, Bo Bassett visited Nebraska, and it's going to be interesting to see where Bassett lands, because that last six is looking interesting. I really tend to believe he's going to go Penn State, but it's going to get interesting because I don't think that's locked in. But Nebraska's got a good-looking team this upcoming year, and I think it'd be really great. I know previously I talked about Bo Bassett and how he would mix with Iowa, and now we're kind of in that crunch time because he's in his senior year. So Bo Bassett is going into his senior year, so now it's a lot of that connotation of, hey, you got to commit somewhere. You don't got to do it right away, but this is where we're gonna kind of figure it out. And I kind of feel like him and Melvin are gonna head to Penn State. That's how I feel. I feel like Kale will get him. And if they don't go Penn State, I think they're going to be with the Cowboys at Okie State. And I only say that because, what it seems like is a lot of who wanted to be at Penn State for Kale Sanderson or David Taylor, being able to say, hey, you got David Taylor that maybe had to roll around with. They're all at Okie at this point, and we all know who. And that's not saying that is why they left Penn State. No, I'm just, as I always say, Google it first and foremost, and this is just my opinion, a speculatory opinion. So this is a speculatory opinion that it kind of felt like, okay, David Taylor takes this Okie State job, and then you got all these guys, not a lot, but you got some guys stick it out for a year, and then they're over there. Some guys left right away. It just kind of brought that up, that some guys are going and coming. But I definitely think that in terms of Bo Bassett, I think Nebraska is solid. They got a good-looking team. They look really well. They might be looking at, how the success of Nebraska was able to do with Jordan Burroughs. I think that's something that might be into play here. That may be coming into play, and that's something that could be interesting. That Mark Manning did a really great job with Jordan Burroughs. They may be thinking that he could do the same. They're trying to maybe say there's a method to the madness? Maybe. I think that, and there were many others over there from not just Jordan Burroughs. There were a lot of others over there that came from Nebraska that did very well. And I will tell you in a minute. James Green was one of them. That was another Nebraska. Really good. So I think the partake here is that they understand that Nebraska can do really great things for wrestlers and all of that. And I think that they're seeing what is to offer, But the case may be here that I say this a lot. I know it's a Bassett talk, but I say this a lot, that this college wrestling game and this college wrestling world right now is it's shaken up so bad with all these coaching changes that you're not seeing, in the previous years, we would have probably saw like top 4 or 5 recruits, Penn State, right away. Penn State. You're not seeing that anymore. You're kind of seeing a lot of them say, I don't want to be over there. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but this is the first and foremost. I'm not, Penn State has their own things. I'm not going to get into detail about what may or may not be going on there. That has nothing to do with the variety of our episode. That's my Google it. I will not provide you any of that to what, the problems of Penn State. Every university has problems, and I say the problems of Penn State. I'm not going to, so I don't say that's costing them recruits, but you start to think, is it or is it not? And I'm not saying it is. In no way, shape, or form am I saying it is. As I said, this is a speculatory opinion. And in that, I really think that, like, the chase here is that what are you doing? What are you doing? If you're not doing some of the right things, what are you doing? And that's not in terms of Penn State. That's in terms of everybody. I mean, like I said, when we talked about UNC and AJ Ferrari, what are you doing? AJ Ferrari is up at Nebraska now doing, what I feel is going to do really great things. And he's with Mark Manning. Like, he's gonna end up, hopefully ends up with another national title here. Like, I think it's just a lot of, I don't even want to say it's a lot of outside eyes. I really feel like most cases it's a lot of outside eyes that just don't understand it. It's I get when, they're big backing alumni and a lot of this, and they want to have an opinion and weigh a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, it is going to be what it is. But sometimes you got to make the right choices. And I'm not saying any which way has made the wrong choice. In terms of wrestling news in this offseason, there have been a lot of choices that, some would see as, hey, it is what it is. But some of the best things that I have learned just in this offseason is that Bo Bassett is going to land somewhere good. Will that team get a team title? Possibly. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be first place, but I'm saying they may possibly receive, something. That would be cool to see. Like I said, in most cases, I want Bassett to land. I want him to land, I want him to find a good place where he can succeed himself, because at the end of the day, however we may feel about Bo Bassett, the thoughts and feelings is that's some good wrestling that goes on. We can all learn from it, And I say we, as in the fans of the weigh-in, not me specifically, because my days on the mat are long over. But I say we, as in the fans that watch this, the people who watch these epis. Yeah, there's a lot you can learn from Bo Bassett. It's I say any guy, doesn't matter if he texts his guy in the first period, if he texts him second period, pins him second period. Doesn't matter what the result or outcome is, you can always learn from it. A guy who texts somebody in the first period, guess what? I bet you half those turns were probably great transitions where they hit one, they got their back points, they hit another. And you can learn from that to being able to set up turn after turn. Thinking about once you set up one and you get your points, setting up the next turn. And that's, what I would assume all coaches want out of a lot of the wrestlers, that I would call it transition wrestling, transitioning into the next position, transitioning into what it is. I know they have an official term for it, but I don't know off the top of my head. Well, I got it. The term is chain wrestling. That's what they call it, chain wrestling. When you chain wrestle really well, you can learn from that. Even if the guy, you say, well, he just teched him in the first period. It's not that I can learn. Yeah. What turns did he tech him with? You can learn. You can always learn from it. And I think that's a really good connotation, is that you can always learn from a lot of that. And that's one of the things that I like to really always break down, is that you can learn from most of those turns and most of the stuff that goes on in most cases. If not really, but in most cases, yeah, you can learn from a lot of those turns, which is really good, because that's how I learned a lot of my stuff. I know I've told you before, I learned the spladle from I learned the spladle, another move I learned is Anthony Ashnault used to do a really good tilt. And I first learned it via watching Rutgers wrestle. And then it was after that, I was at the wrestling club Apex. I was at Apex, and they were talking about what's some good things you saw from last night's Rutgers match. And I went up there and said, well, Ashnault, right off the whistle in the second period, hit two really great tilts. and we went over that tilt that day. And I mean, I formally first learned it from the match, but then learned it formally from coaching, and that was that really helped me because that tilt stuck with me. That was probably one of the best things I learned from an Anthony Astronaut match is how quickly off the whistle on top, how he had a tilt locked up. And there's a lot of guys like that now, but that was like tilt's already there. Like it was matters. Like I felt like sometimes it was seconds. I feel some cases, it would take him some time to get in there, but when he got that tilt, that's what I learned, that Astronaut had a really good tilt. And when I learned that, I started doing that. And then what I did was I chain wrestled off that. So, you can't do that stuff now because now the referees, they make you let go of the arm. But I used to lock up the tilt, the crossbody tilt, get that arm, tilt it up, roll and hit the tilt. When I would let him back down, I would hold onto the arm, and then I would hit what we called it a hook it tilt. I would go and hook the tilt. And when I was coming out of 8th grade, coming in high school, you were able to do that. You were able to let one go. They gave your points. You hooked the tilt, but then they refined the rules and said you got to fully let go of that arm to the point where he can put his arm forward, and then they even refined it after the fact, said you can't, because what guys used to do is they used to lodge the knee and then say, hey, my hands are off, and they were given the points. Then they said, no, you can't lodge the knee. His hand has to be fully free, and then you can do another turn. But I used to chain wrestle like that. I used to hit one, get my 3, and I used to hit another. Even if I got the takedown, I would chain wrestle like that. I transitioned very well into 2 tilts. And that's the way I would do it. And I learned very well, the hook and tilt I learned when I was in recreation wrestling. And when I learned that, that stuck with me, to always run the hook and tilt, the hook and tilt. I love to run that hook and tilt. And then I learned very well, you could jump over and you could jump over and roll over and hit the tilt. I thought that was pretty nice. I thought it was pretty nice up till I will give you guys the Soul Totem. My senior year of high school, I was JV. Just gonna put that out there. I was a JV wrestler that year. Whatever the case may be. We're in a match. I won't give particulars, but we were in a match. Teammate hit one of those and hopped right over, rolled right over, and the opponent did not the momentum didn't roll right away, and he almost pinned himself. And that I don't say it's like in the moment it was something that was like, definitely heartbeat, and when you got a close team score and you run something like that and you almost pin yourself, like and it's no fault to anybody. When you hit those things, you gotta really, because when you run the hook and tilt, you're putting the when you run the hook and tilt, you're running the hand, to where you have it real tight, through the legs, real tight, and then you're hooking. When a lot of times you go to pull back, if he's not moving, you roll over, you roll forward, and you try to pull the momentum. But if you don't, and he doesn't move right away, you got to go back and forth to get the momentum till he sits, till he falls right in, and you can get your back points. If he does it, you almost pin yourself. And that's what happened there. But it just was something that, like, it was close one. Nobody really likes to have a close situation like that. But there are tons of moments. That's one thing. If I leave you with that, no matter what, when you're transition wrestling, make sure you don't expose yourself in the situation. Don't transition into something and then you almost pin yourself. That is probably, I don't know the percentage, but I know that's probably I would say that's probably a percentage somewhere where that's the cost to a lot of losses. Not at the college level as much, but it definitely is it definitely causes a lot of upsets. You don't want to pin yourself. You know, I've had that more than many times happen in my own matches. Not by me though. I didn't ever pin myself. That's one thing I never really did there. But it more than enough times I've had it happen in a lot of matches, and when it happens in a match, one of the things is like it's because you got to improve your position. You can't if when you're transitioning at anything, if it's transitioning turns into another turn, if it's transitioning positions, you got to keep moving, because when you stop moving, that's when your opponent is then going to start getting, a leg up or an angle on you, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. So that's generally why I say, you got to improve, 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 and you don't want to stop moving in any situation. But with that being said, we're in the end of the epi. Uh, like, comment, subscribe, guys. This is another epi. Wrestling season's getting closer, so don't worry. We're gonna get a lot more wrestling as soon as wrestling season comes up. We're gonna have all that college wrestling news, and we will be keeping up with the Bassett news. I know we were not on that train early, but now we're starting to notice a little bit what's going on with this Bassett, because he's going to be able to go well, and I think potentially you're going to see the Bassett brothers at the same school, and that would be really cool. I don't remember the last time we've seen that brothers at the same school. It's probably happened a lot sooner, but top of my head at the end of this episode, I don't know. But one thing I will say is it'd be nice to see Bassett and his brother win national championships in the same year. But off the top of my head, I can think of is when AJ Ferrari was there with his brother over at Iowa. But nonetheless, I still think, it's fairly interesting. But that is this week's Takedown Thursdays, an episode of the Weigh-In Podcast by Benoit Chestnut and the Poppin' Sebastian Romero. And just that is another one. Weigh-In out.
The Weigh-In, where stories ignite.